You get no countdown. You get no countdown at all when you do this, just so you guys know. So the first 5 to 10 seconds are almost guaranteed to be awkward. So I want to come on and make a video about a topic I think I've talked about in many different videos, but I maybe never made one video bringing all of the pieces together. And maybe people in the audience will pop in and join me and give me some unexpected questions, some unexpected distraction from my own focused monologue on the topic. So talking about political change, how to pursue it, cultural change, how to accomplish it, right? And there's a broad theoretical question here. It gets very narrow and very specific very quickly. Why? Because, you can talk about the pursuit of political change when you are running a multi-million-dollar organization, a huge budget, a huge number of adherents and supporters, right? You can talk about the pursuit of political change when you are a completely powerless, isolated individual. And you may not even have charisma on your side. You may have no social media followers. You may have nobody who follows you, trusts you in real life. You may be despised within your own society. People may be racist against you in your own society. You may not have a station or level of respectability or whatever. There may be myriad reasons why in your own society you are really genuinely a voiceless, powerless person. Now, think about Voltaire. So Voltaire was handsome and witty and charming and born rich. And how did he change the world? He wrote books. He wrote books, and interestingly, one of the most powerful things he did was making the sitting room of his mansion. By today's standards, it's not that big a house, but at that time it was considered a castle. He had a salon. He had a room where he accepted guests. And to my knowledge, every day, I believe 7 days a week, he received guests and spoke to them face to face. People would line up. People would make a pilgrimage to go and speak to the great man. And many of the most important things he accomplished politically just came from people coming to talk to him face to face and him making the time formally. He had a secretary who would write down people's names, say, okay, Voltaire receives guests at a certain time. This is not conventional activism. It's not conventional protest or radicalism. Right? Voltaire really changed the world. And all the conventional radicals and revolutionaries you're talking about, almost all of them failed. So there's something to learn from here. Now, I like to start these discussions with examples that are very palpable, that are very real life and real world. So I'm going to talk about elitism briefly, in a sense that all of you can understand and all of you can relate to. Elitism gets very abstract very quickly for most of us. Elitism is not a philosophy, right? This is something very palpable. It's a face-to-face reality. In the same sense, snobbery is not a philosophy, right? What is the philosophy of the snob? Go to your library, ask for a book. I need a book that will tell me how to be a snob. I need to understand the essence and the philosophy of what it is to be a snob. There is no such book. There is no such section in the library. There is no such department at the university. You cannot get a major in snobbery. And yet, of course, what many people do learn in university is precisely snobbery. I think that's fair to say. They may learn nothing else of value except how to be a snob. You can set up a gym that is only open to vegans. That can be a form of activism, right? It's just elitism. Let's say you're in, could be any city in the world, we take as an example. Let's say you're in San Francisco and you set up a very desirable high-end dining club that is only open to members and their guests. So this is common for high-end dining clubs. And to be a member, you must be vegan. All right, and this is you're not even open to every vegan. You're only open to certain special people who are vegans. This is outright elitism. And there's word on the street, oh, gee, this is this fabulous restaurant, this fabulous, complex. You know what? You could have the restaurant, you could have the gym upstairs. You could combine these ideas, right? Let's just say you've got tables set out for people to dine at, and there's a small stage where sometimes, once in a while, you have stand-up comedy events. I'm saying stand-up comedy rather than a rock concert, just because the type of investment and the type of seating involved is very different. A dinner club, a high-end dinner club, can double as a venue for stand-up comedy, maybe for a small jazz quartet or something too, right? You start doing these kind of gigs. Maybe on those nights, when you have and you book, by the way, I'm not talking about booking vegan comedians. You book the biggest acts you can, mainstream comedian. You become a known destination as a high-end dinner club for stand-up comedy, right? And when people go there, they go there, oh, wow, this is nice. This is an exclusive club. This is elitism. Oh, do you know to be a member of this club, you have to be vegan? Okay. Elitism and explicitly elite organizations of this kind have influenced the transformation of societies, including the United States of America from its founding. All right. Right after the American Revolution was done, there were immediately elitist, snobbish organizations founded for the veterans of the revolution, for members of the officers' corps. And there were actually political protests against them because people said, we do not want to live through the creation of a new aristocracy. And that was what they saw with these gentlemen's clubs. So one of the most elite of these gentlemen's clubs, so it was a gentlemen's club only for people who had been officers in the revolution, people who've been on the right side of the war, so to speak, and who would probably be members of the right social class to begin with, to be an officer rather than a normal member of the infantry or what have you. They very successfully lobbied the government during the negotiations in Philadelphia, right? The negotiations that would write the Constitution. They simply had dinner parties down the street, and they wielded a lot of influence. Okay, all right. So this is elitism, all right. And what Voltaire did, also a kind of elitism, although it's a kind of elitism that anyone who's had a hit book could participate. There's a kind of power here, and it's not power lurking in the shadows. Now, why do I mention this? Why do I talk about these palpable, attainable, real-world examples of what it is to influence people, what it is to guide cultural and political change? It's because you may think of this kind of elitism as a special privilege. We have this word privilege. You may think, oh, well, these are things that only the strongest among us, these are tools, these are weapons only the strongest among us can ever wield. And you're wrong. These are the weapons of the weak, right? Voltaire, from his castle, you know what I mean? Voltaire inviting dinner guests to sit and hear him lecture, and writing his books and writing his poems and writing his opinion pieces in the newspaper, writing letters to the editor, right? This is not a position of power. This is not a position of strength. Most of the fantasies about how to accomplish social and political change for both the left wing and the right wing, the conservatives and the rednecks are really just as bad. Most of them are fantasies concerning mass organizations making use of violence. Right? That's a privilege of a few. How many people in the whole history of the world have ever been in a position to command an army, to command, huge numbers of followers, to move crowds in that way, right? To give commands and have them tear down the palace or tear down the parliament to enforce their will against the government. Now, also, whenever you read about the real history of real revolutions, unlike the ideologies, unlike the propaganda, unlike what's said about revolutions, after all the broken glass has been swept away, most of what we call revolutions in reality were more like a military coup d'etat. Because who are the people? Who are the people who have guns? It's very easy to say, well, the people had an uprising and changed the government. Almost every single time when you look into it, actually the crucial question was about which units of the army broke away from their commanders and turned against the old government or started to support the new government. Actually, what you're talking about are not hippies in the streets holding, placards or something. It's not flower children playing the guitar and asking the government to change. It comes down to nasty, violent military struggle. That's normally the reality of what we're talking about. This includes, the French Revolutions, plural, and what happens step by step. If you're not reading propaganda about it, you're going to see that the crucial question at every stage has to do with the military. So look, if you're talking about theories of how to accomplish political change, theories of how to accomplish cultural change, well, do you want to theorize about circumstances that don't apply to you in your life? Like, do you want to start on a chalkboard, drawing a great big circle and learning from all kinds of examples in the history of the world that don't apply to you? Or do you want to start, do you want to work from the particular circumstances you're in and then draw the circle outward? Say, okay, so it seems like I have only this tiny range of options right now. There's so little I can do to influence the world or accomplish or contribute to political and social change. And now let's expand it a bit, right? Now look, the Haitian Revolution, the revolution that took place in Haiti. So this is an historical series of events that has fascinated me since about the year 2001. This is now 20 years I've known about and read about and done research on it. I don't have to tell the whole story about how I first did research on it. I did a research project on it back in about 2001. At that time, it was an incredibly obscure topic in the history of the world. Since then, several movies have been made about it. It's talked about on YouTube. Several books have been published. So the Haitian Revolution has become less obscure. There is no analysis I can give you for the Haitian Revolution that will have anything to do with what you can accomplish in the pursuit of a vegan future, as people want to say. And look, I just got to say, guys, veganism is only one political issue I care about. I care about so many political issues. I care about police reform. I care about police brutality. I care about justice. I care about the working of the courts of law, right? And, when you talk to the police and when you talk to lawyers and so on, the main thing you hear again and again is, we can't do anything about it. We can't help you. Now, I could give a bunch of examples here, but including my experience with the other YouTuber, Durian Rider, that I talked about lately. He threatened to kill me, and we had proof of that. He threatened to have me beaten up. He threatened real violence against me. And I'm going through this with my lawyer, and the first thing he says, no, but none of that will stick in court. The only charge we could go after him on was defamation, which he was also guilty of. Remember, at the beginning, you're talking like, what is this? The defamation is bad, but why is it that's the only crime he's guilty of here? Life is full of these things. It's been more than 7 years for me to get divorced. Even the divorce system doesn't work. I mean, there's so many things. If you're a teenager watching this, you don't know. You get out, you have some real experience in the real world, and you see that the system is broken. And this is not a problem just with the United States of America. This is not a problem just with Canada. I am going to make here the vague, menacing insinuation that this is actually a global phenomenon. This is part of the breakdown of a concept of social and cultural order that goes back to the Roman Empire, and it really doesn't work anymore. I know this is a stretch, but this is my field, okay? I would say that the same legal system that began in Rome today doesn't work in America. It doesn't work in England. It doesn't work in Italy. It doesn't work in Spain, okay? And it doesn't work in Asian countries like Japan and Singapore that imitate our legal system, our justice system. I really am saying that this is kind of a global phenomenon of this system not working anymore. Now, you could get into a separate question of, well, when did it work? That's a great question. And maybe the answer is never. I'm not going to get into it, but I don't have some kind of golden age thinking like, oh, back in the 1930s, nobody had any problem. Yeah, nobody had any cameras in the 1930s. Nobody had video cameras in their pocket to record what the police were doing to people in the 1930s. I don't engage in this kind of golden age thinking. But we are living through the obsolescence of a justice system. Okay. And I care about that passionately, and I'm deeply concerned about it. All right. And part of my interest in the Black Lives Matter phenomenon, BLM, was that this was giving us a kind of test case. It was giving us a kind of opportunity to challenge and overturn the assumptions of that centuries-long tradition of how our society is ordered, of how our society is governed, right? Of what is justice, of what is the role and the responsibility of the police, so on and so forth, right? Like there were really basic fundamental questions raised by the death of a series of Black men and women in the United States of America. And by the way, if you watch my channel, I'm no fool. I actually did research on these cases. In many cases, the mainstream media lied about what happened, and the police actually did nothing wrong. But still, those cases raise these important questions. I mean, I'll stand by that. Even the cases where the police actually did nothing wrong, but they were perceived to have done something wrong, those still raise these important questions. So an extreme case that's been covered on my channel was Althea Brown, right, who claimed she had a fantasy or a delusion, or she had some kind of, we assume it was out of insanity and not out of intentional lying, but she reported to police that a group of white racists sprayed her with, what's the term, lighter fluid, sprayed her with some kind of barbecue ignition fluid and lit her on fire. Well, what do you know? Every single thing about this story was a lie, and it was proven. There was videotape evidence, there was physical evidence, everything about this. It was either fantasy or paranoid delusion. But even a case like that where the police did nothing wrong and there were no white people who attacked her, none of it happened, with videotape evidence of every minute that she passed through every intersection on her way. And so it's complete fraud, complete canard. Nevertheless, you can look at this and say, there's evidence here of how the system doesn't work. Now, again, I'm not trying to expand the scope of this video infinitely, but you may or may not already know about me. I feel likewise that the system of university education we have in the West, which interestingly doesn't begin with the Roman Empire, it begins with the Dark Ages. Our system of university education originates in monasteries in the Catholic Christian Dark Ages. That is the origin. And great centers of learning in the Dark Ages included Toledo, right? So the monastic universities of Toledo, and these were imitated elsewhere across Europe and so on. So that in terms of where that tradition comes from, but guess what? It's been imitated everywhere. The university system in communist China, the university system in democratic capitalist Japan, the university system around a huge part of the world, all of it, to an appalling extent, is a second-rate imitation of what's already a bad system, whether you're looking at England or the United States. So there were a lot of things, there were a lot of big fundamental political questions on which I am a dissident and which I'm totally dissatisfied with what's going on in Western democracy. Now, I don't fit into any camp. I don't fit into the left-wing camp. I don't fit into the right-wing camp. Bernie Sanders supporters think I'm right-wing. I assume Trump supporters think I'm left-wing. You know what I mean? There's no simple solution for me, right? So the question is, what do you do with your own life in the pursuit of political and cultural change? Now, there's inspiration for this video is in part my ongoing clash of swords with the YouTuber known as Cranky Vegan, right? I don't have to get into it personally with him because it's not a personal matter, right? But Cranky Vegan asked me repeatedly, and it really wasn't clear to me this was a sincere question when he was first asking, but he asked me repeatedly, well, what is your theory of social change? What is your theory in the pursuit of political and cultural change? And from my perspective, I was like, what do you mean? Haven't I made 15, 20 videos talking about that? Don't you already know what I have to say about that? So to me, this is part of what made it kind of perplexing and astounding. And I asked one of my fans, and I have made videos, tell you about that. And he followed this up by saying, and what are you doing in your own life in the pursuit of that, whatever your theory may be of how to achieve political culture change? So, I mean, I can start there rather than starting on the grander sphere of how in history political change is accomplished. But when we talk about me, right, inevitably we lower our standards, we lower our expectations, because we're talking about one man. Hi, Ron. Shout out to everyone in the audience. Shout out to Ron Sims. Shout out to Frida. Shout out to Nacho. Shout out to Obsidian. We're talking about one man with no budget, with 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, with very limited power, with very limited options. Right? Okay. Many people are shocked when I say openly that Black Lives Matter has been a failure, that it's a negative example. Okay. I am recording this on June 4th, 2021. Black Lives Matter was founded in the year 2013. We are talking about more than 7 years. What history have you studied? Whether it's the history of the Haitian Revolution or the American Revolution or the French Revolution, whether it is the history of, as I've said many, many times, the abolition of alcohol in the United States. I think it was the 15th Amendment. Sorry, I'm getting the number wrong. The amendment to the Constitution that made alcohol illegal. Any example, the history of women getting the vote, history of fascism, communism, the rise of democracy in different places around the world. Democracy as communism fell apart in Eastern Europe. A great example is democracy in Mongolia. Mongolia used to be a communist country. They had a very rapid, dramatic transition from communism to democracy. Like, if you think that what Black Lives Matter accomplished in 7 years with millions of dollars in backing and millions of newspaper articles, millions of TV stories, millions of radio stories, seen and heard and read by hundreds of millions of people. It would not be an understatement to say billions of people, right? If you think that what they did with all that money and all that public interest and all that support in the last 7 years, if you think that is a success, let me ask you, what is a failure? What are your stands for a failure? Democracy in Myanmar, it's a failure, right? We can say it's 2021. If you gave that money to the pro-democracy forces in Myanmar, do you think it would be a failure? Do you think nothing would change in 7 years? If we try to estimate or add up the budget, and some of it's public, some of it's not, but just the corporate donations that were given to Black Lives Matter, and we take that and we hand it over to a Burmese Democratic Radical Front, the people who are willing to fight and die to have elections and freedom of speech, freedom of press, and so on, the rights and liberties people take for granted in Western Europe. If you hand that money over to pro-democracy forces in Myanmar, do you think nothing is going to change in 7 years? And most of these successful examples of dramatic change, they happened without any of this kind of press coverage, support, donations, so on and so forth. Whether we're talking about Voltaire, sitting there is not, he seems pretty small and powerless and penniless even compared to the phenomenon we're talking about with Black Lives Matter. Or indeed, if we're talking about the pro-democracy forces in Mongolia that managed to change, the history of their country, managed to change the fate of that whole part of the world. And if you think that wasn't a hard struggle, you may think of Mongolia as being in the middle of nowhere. It's not. They were directly in between Russia and China. And both Russia and China were using all their might to control the future and the political destiny of that country. Both Russia and China, to give a very palpable example, wanted to control the railway system within Mongolia. They still do. They were deeply involved in life and business in Mongolia to that extent. There was an ongoing competition for Russia and between Russia and China for who could control the fate of Mongolia the most. That's basically been their political situation for the last 100 years or more, roughly. It's the story of Mongolia in modern times, is being a place equidistant in between Russia and China. So there were powerful forces working against their transition to democracy. And there was also a sense of self-preservation and self-defense from the elites in that country who had been attached to the Communist Party. So again, this is a contrast to BLM. It's a contrast to veganism. It's a contrast to whatever example you want to use. There were people still alive in Mongolia at that time who were responsible for massacres. They were responsible for hunting down and killing people in the name of communism. And they knew correctly, accurately, that if the transition to democracy happened, they would be put in prison or they would be executed. They knew one way or another, there'd be a trial or maybe people would just killed in the streets. There was a whole generation, all the wealthiest, all the most powerful people in that country had blood on their hands from what it took to create and sustain the communist government that they had. And they knew if this falls, this is replaced with democracy, it was over for them, that this would change their lives directly. So they were fighting as hard as they could. And guess what, guys? I've written articles about this before. It didn't even take 7 years. It was almost instantaneous, the transition to democracy. Okay? Mongolia wrote a new constitution. Mongolia changed its fate forever. And let me ask you, whether you are talking about pot-smoking hippies who support and sympathize with veganism, or you are talking about African Americans dissatisfied with police brutality, okay? Do you think Mongolians really have any advantages in terms of level of education, level of wealth, level of organization? Like, this is pre-internet, guys. Like, think about the resources they had at their disposal in Mongolia as communism is falling apart and transitioning in Russia and China to the north and south of them, right? Okay. They made a change because they wanted it, all right? They did what it took to change the fate of their country, okay? And they did not have, the leaders of the pro-democracy forces in Mongolia did not have then and don't have, they never had the level even of journalism, journalistic support, coverage in the press. You can look it up there. Was the New York Times following with rapt interest the political transformation of Mongolia? They did not have the phenomenon of financial support or public interest or anything else that Black Lives Matter has had, okay? So look, if you're talking about police brutality, I care. If you're talking about police reform, fundamental reform to the justice system, fundamental reform to how the country is governed and how people are arrested and what police responsibilities are and how crimes are tried, I'm passionate about that, and I'm passionate about that to improve everyone's life, not just Black people's lives, white people's lives, and all kinds of people's lives are going to be improved if you fundamentally challenge and fundamentally reform the system. How much positive progress towards that goal has Black Lives Matter made? In my opinion, zero. And if you think it is slightly more than zero, because it can only be slightly more, then you have to compare that to the harm done. The harm is very real. Okay, the damage done is very real. And there's this strange game going on, especially amongst vegan activists, of imagining that anytime you get your name into the newspapers, anytime you get press coverage, that it's a good and wonderful thing, that it's building the future of the movement, that it's a great success, and it may be a success for your fundraising. And they don't even care if the press coverage is negative, if the press coverage is saying what these vegan activists are doing is bad and evil and wrong. They don't even care if what they're doing is building up more public resentment, more hostility, more skepticism, if they're undermining their own credibility, if they're destroying their constituency and the potential for actually accomplishing real change. It's in that sense that people imagine Black Lives Matter is a success, all right? Because the culture of clout chasing, the culture of fame whoring has become so prevalent. The Instagramification of life has become so profoundly influential that people imagine that no matter what you're doing, as long as it's getting you more clicks on Facebook, as long as it's getting you more hearts on Instagram, as long as it's getting you more likes, more attention, they don't even care if it's good attention or bad attention, that if you are getting newspaper headlines, if you are getting notoriety or fame, then you're making progress. And you're not. Newspaper headlines are not fame. Newspaper headlines are not progress, okay? Change is change. Change is what happened in Mongolia. After communism fell, they replaced the communist government with a new constitution and a new government. Change is what happened in France in 1789 when they started with a blank sheet of paper and started writing a completely new legal code. That code wasn't finished, by the way, until Napoleon was in power. It took a long time to actually write a whole new legal code, but they wrote a new constitution. They took away the powers of the church. They took away the powers of the aristocracy. They fundamentally changed everything. And guess what? 7 years is a long time. In the history of the French Revolution, in the history of the American Revolution, in the history of the Mongolian Revolution, 7 years is enough. It's been long enough for us to judge. I started this video by saying I was going to talk about my theory of political change, my theory of cultural change, and how it applies to you as an individual positively. Because it's not that useful to draw a huge circle where we're talking about the revolution in Haiti, and we can draw conclusions about that, but it has no relevance to your life and your situation as an individual. Now, part of Cranky Vegan's complaint against me is that he says that most of what he hears from me, most of what he hears me talk about, it's posed in the form of a critique where I'm saying what's wrong and what doesn't work, as opposed to saying positively what my model for change is. All right. I've got to tell you something. It's for a reason, guys. It's not accidental. I think that's the main thing that's going to interest you, as individuals in us. I think it's the main way I have you even to reach out to him. I'm trying to relate to a guy when I talk to Cranky Vegan. I'm trying to relate to a guy who's still endorsing disruption. I've made so many videos criticizing, cross-examining this concept of disruption, of the pursuit of cultural change, political change, social change, through disruption and saying it just doesn't work. Now, I'm not going to recapitulate that here, but this, for those of you who already know my other videos, this will, remind you what I have to say about that. If you believe that this kind of disruption gets results, then you must believe that the anti-abortion activists are the most effective activists in the history of the United States of America. You must believe that the anti-abortion movement has been tremendously successful. And of course, they must always be more successful than veganism because they have a much larger constituency. They have much larger financial support. They have much more people who are interested. They have millions of people who are passionately, religiously committed to the anti-abortion cause. And guess what? It doesn't work. It's a total failure. Why? By what metric? I've put this chart up on screen before. Just look at the number of abortions. So there's a lot of Latin words in here. The number of abortions per capita per annum. Okay, so these are Latin terms meaning how many abortions are people choosing to get per person per year. Brief pause. We're now more than 30 minutes into the live stream. We have 26 people in the audience and only 15 thumbs up. I understand if you're sitting on the fence, if you're not sure whether or not this video needs a thumbs up or a thumbs down, I understand. But I'm just saying it would be better for the video. It would be better for us to reach more people while I'm live streaming right now. It will reach a larger audience if more people hit the thumbs up. If we got 26 people in the audience and all 26 of you give a thumbs up, it does actually help me. I know this video, there was no advance warning. I just hit record and went. So I know the audience consists of people who just happen to be online or happen to be washing the dishes and wanted to listen in the background. I didn't post this on my Instagram. I didn't post this on Patreon. I didn't post this anywhere. I just hit play and let's go. There was no advance warning on YouTube. So thank you guys. A whole bunch of people just hit the thumbs up. I know you don't remember it, so that's why I'm reminding you. But as spontaneous as this may be, I think you will agree it'd be great if more people would join the audience. And it'll be great if after this is posted, also be great if it can reach a larger audience. These are very meaningful questions for a small number of people. That's what a lot of my content is like, it's deeply meaningful to a narrow audience as opposed to being only a little bit interesting, only a little bit meaningful to a mass audience. That's the kind of content I create, generally speaking, on my YouTube channel. Where were we?
Well, you were talking about how positively, what you are positive.
Right. Critique versus right. Okay. All right. So when I'm speaking to someone like Cranky Vegan, I'm hearing him passionately propound this model of disruption. And I'm able to say back, look, disruption, and the specific model of disruption you are endorsing, right? Now, let's be clear. What does disruption mean? It definitely does include things like blocking a road so that no traffic can pass on the road. That is disruption. It's a form of disruption he has endorsed recently. Okay. It definitely does include things like disrupting a restaurant or a grocery store, right? So I endorse none of this. He endorses all of it. Now we could go through a whole bunch more examples. So you know what I mean by disruption. Now, one challenge to this is ethically and philosophically. Oh, well, okay. How would you feel if it were Muslim fundamentalists using the same tactics? What if it's Muslim fundamentalists shutting down the road and stopping all traffic, stopping all economic activities in both ways? He justified this or praised it lately when it was used to very temporarily shut down some McDonald's restaurants in England. That they didn't have enough meat because vegan activists shut off some roads, which is how the meat was transported to these McDonald's restaurants. He's a big fan of this. He endorses this. Okay. Oh, okay. What if it's not somebody who's on your side? Do you think this is a civil right Muslim fundamentalists should have? Because Muslim fundamentalists, they would be very interested in doing this. They might be interested in showing that they object to the government being at war in Afghanistan, and they want to shut down all kinds of businesses that can have a pro-Muslim anti-war movement of this kind. So is this a tactic that's acceptable for everyone, or only political movements you sympathize with? Right? Your enemies can use this, and they can use it against you. How much easier is it for the pro-meat people to shut down all the vegan restaurants this way? Like, really think about this, guys. I used to have, before I had a YouTube channel, I had a vegan blog. And anytime the pro-meat people started attacking my blog, wow, the number of people, like I know some of you may not know what I mean by pro-meat people, but people who wanted to actively attack and denounce vegans and defend and promote eating beef, basically. It always seemed to be beef they were enthusiastic about, not chicken or fish or something. But anyway, those people, they would outnumber the vegans 10,000 to 1. You'd get all this like activism from the pro-meat people. Guess what? They can shut down your vegan restaurant. It's way easier for them to shut down a vegan restaurant. They outnumber you. They have money. They have the money. They have the numbers. They have the passion. They have conviction. There are more people who hate veganism than who support it. And they're also willing to block roads. They're also willing to engage in disruption. Now, there's an infamous YouTube channel, Spherage, and he has actually done vegan style disruptions of vegan restaurants. He's done pro-meat protests in vegan restaurants, and it's horrible. I mean, it's just awful what it's like for the people in the room. It's horrible. Well, guess what? When vegans do that to meat eaters, it's horrible. Do you approve this? No. I think it's natural, whether I'm reaching out to an anonymous audience in general, not that you lovely people are anonymous, Frida, Ronald, whatever, but whether I'm speaking to an audience in general, or I'm reaching out to one specific person like Cranky Vegan, I think it's natural that the segue to talking positively about what kind of methods I think work, what we should do in the pursuit of change, right? It is natural that we are going to get there through a critique of what doesn't work, okay? So I've already said, giving millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter doesn't work. It's ended in failure. Giving millions of dollars to PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, over many decades, doesn't work. It's ended in failure. And I can talk about the metric in just a moment, right? I have criticized specific groups on this channel that you may not have heard of. They're not as famous as PETA, but that have a multi-million-dollar per annum budget, right? So I'll give an example. I think I only made one YouTube video talking about them. Pro-Veg International. Pro-Veg International is headed by a horrible person named Tobias Leonhardt. Tobias Leonhardt, if you want to talk about vegans who are more hated by other vegans than I am, Tobias Leonhardt is one of the most hated vegans in the world. So, and he is one of the spokespeople for Pro-Veg International. Pro-Veg International, more than $1 million a year. Sorry, I've forgotten the exact figure, but I think they're into the multiple millions per annum. When you are looking at a multi-million-dollar institution over many years and looking what they have accomplished or what they haven't accomplished and what the outcomes are, that is something very different from looking at me or you as an individual, who is powerless and perhaps voiceless. The only voice I have is to reach my 10,000 subscribers or what have you, what you can do, what standards we're going to do to evaluate that. So I think it's natural. I think it's natural that we make the segue from this kind of critique. Now, when I ask Cranky Vegan about this, and I think when I ask the audience too, when I ask, does this look like a good use of $3.5 million, some particular organization? So by the way, whether we're talking about Direct Action Everywhere, multi-million-dollar per annum organization. By the way, why do I keep saying this Latin term, per annum? Because the point is not that they had $3 million once, right? Or $1 million once. The point is you're getting $1 million year after year after year after year. You keep having more than $1 million a year coming in income, so that each year you can be spending this money and have more money coming in. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of throughput year after year. So it's a sinking budget of $1 million. That's very different from like if your grandfather dies and leaves you $1 million, but it's only going to happen once. He's not going to die again next year. It's like, okay, I got this $1 million. Got to make it last. No, these are multi-million-dollar per annum organizations, right? But if I say to Cranky Vegan, or if I say to any of you now, okay, here's an example, and they have $3.5 million a year. Are they getting $3.5 million worth of results, of outcomes, of change? Is this making the change politically? Whenever I talk, they say no. They say no. They admit no. There's nothing to show for it, or like what there is to show for it. It's so trivial. As I said earlier with Black Lives Matter, all right? Either you're going to come to the conclusion this is a total failure, this has had zero positive outcomes, or you're going to say, okay, it's slightly more than zero. There's a very modest positive outcome. But then just do the math. Just add up how many millions of dollars, how many millions of people, right? And in a sense, how many millions of hours of effort or work by those millions of people for this very, very modest positive outcome. And as I said with Black Lives Matter, we also have to question with these vegan organizations, okay, so if you've got a little bar there for the positive outcomes, how big is the bar for the negative outcomes? Because they do damage too. They do harm. Like what little they're accomplishing positively has to be seen in a context of very real harm. So if you guys didn't know, Black Lives Matter burned down several city blocks. They did engage in looting. People were killed. Most of the people killed were other Black people at the protests. I'm not saying zero white people go, but I read in detail really horrifying accounts. Talked about one on my channel. There was a woman. She was driving her kid. I think she was driving her kid back from a birthday party at a friend's house. Something completely mundane and suburban. She's black. Her kid's black. There are these protesters by the Wendy's who are blocking the road and not letting anyone pass. So again, this actually comes back to the same. They were standing there with guns saying that they would block anyone, they'd prevent any traffic from passing that intersection. So do you believe this is a moral form of protest? I don't. This woman comes up and she's got her kid in the back seat. I forget if she has one kid or two in the back seat. Sorry, some details I'm forgetting. But anyway, and she mouths off to this guy and says, hey, look, why are you blocking the road? I've got to drive. She was either driving home or driving her kid to the friends, but I think she was driving home. I got to drive my kid. I'm doing whatever. Black Lives Matter, fine, but why are you screwing up my life this way? Okay, and they shot a bunch of bullets at the car and people died. Okay, this is the kind of thing that came up. There was damage done. There was harm done, tremendous harm that'll last forever. And, burning down cities, burning down shops, there's real damage. There's real damage done by vegan activism. And I'm saying the benefits or the positive accomplishments, it's either unreal, it's either zero, or it's very close to zero, very modest, very minor. So, okay, just say this is the framing. This is the context within which we have to talk about the pursuit of political change, within which we have to talk about the pursuit of cultural change. It's a context within which there are no easy answers, but we can establish the easy questions. We can say, look, Dr. Gregor on YouTube, multi-million per annum budget. Direct Action Everywhere, multi-million per annum budget. Anonymous for the Voiceless, multi-million dollar per annum budget. PETA. It's unbelievable. Go download and look at the numbers for PETA now, how much money they get and how much money they spend per year. It's mind-blowing. Multi-million dollar per annum budget. And guess what? None of it works. None of it. And there's a very simple metric. In the same way that I've discussed in depth and past the metric for how many abortions people get per year. Because ultimately, what all this protesting is about, all this so-called disruption is about, is a personal choice. It comes down to you and you, as a million points of light, a million individuals. You have to make the decision to do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. It's like sobriety. You have to be committed. I'm not going to smoke cigarettes. I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm not going to do drugs. It's on me. It doesn't matter what political movement you signed up to. Doesn't matter who you vote for. Ultimately, it's your personal responsibility, like sobriety, to say, I'm going to walk this line. I'm going to take on this burden because it's the right thing to do. I'm going to refuse to eat meat. Okay? Asking a woman to refuse to get an abortion when she has an accidental pregnancy is an unbelievable sacrifice. And you can Google it right now, or you can look it up on YouTube. And there are thousands of women who are proud, and they're going to boast to you that they did the right thing, either because they believe in Jesus or they believe in the Pope. There are thousands and thousands of women who will say this. But holy shit, to raise the child of a man you don't love, of a man you don't like, of a man you might have had a one-night stand with, of a man you might not even remember having sex with. You might have gotten drunk and had a one-night stand, and you don't really know that guy. And now you're pregnant with this baby, and you want this woman, on a matter of principle that you're preaching, whether they're Christian or not. In the States, most of them are Christian, but there are some people who are secular and anti-abortion. Vegan Gains, #1 YouTube psychopath. Vegan Gains is an atheist, but he's morally opposed to abortion. So there you go. There are people who are committed to that perspective. You're asking this woman to spend the next 20 years raising the child of a man she doesn't love or doesn't like, or a pregnancy that was just unwanted, that was in the wrong time in her life. She just isn't settled down, doesn't have a home, doesn't have a job, or a home isn't set up in a way. You want her to make that commitment and live with the consequences for your principles. In the parlance of our times, that is a big ask. That is asking a lot of someone, right? But it comes down to a personal choice and personal responsibility. So when you look at the chart that shows how many abortions people are actually getting per capita per annum, that is the measure of the failure of the anti-abortion movement. That is the measure of the failure of their tactics, the same tactics being used by vegan activists. And when you look at the chart that shows how many pounds of meat everyone is eating per year, there are two charts. You can look them both up right now. How many pounds of meat are being produced per capita per annum? How many pounds of meat are being consumed per capita per annum. You look at those lines, and you can see that all of the tactics used by PETA, by Direct Action Everywhere, by Anonymous for the Voiceless, by Dr. Greger, absolutely all of them have failed. Now, let me ask you honestly, this is something for you guys to ask yourself. I've already said, I got love for police reform. Like I got love for the fundamental questions that are being raised by Black Lives Matter. I just disagree with the organization. I disagree with Marxism. I disagree with communism. I disagree with the answers they're posing. But like police kill people in the United States of America. It raises questions, and I'm so jazzed. I'm so positive. I'm so ready for people to finally question what is written in that Constitution and ask, can't we do better? People to finally look at the court system and why it is you have to bankrupt yourself to have a lawyer to plead your case. Why it is, you better save up all your money and go into debt so you don't die because rich people get away with crimes and poor people don't. There's so much outrageously wrong about the Constitution, about the court system, about the police, about the prisons, about every stage of the justice system. I'm not an apologist for any of it, right? But Black Lives Matter is a bullshit movement, and it's a failure. And let me ask you, if you give them another 7 years and another $100 million, do you think it'll be a success? Do you think that's what's been lacking? The anti-abortion movement, if they keep using the same methods, the same tactics, if you give them another 7 years and another $100 million, do you think it'll suddenly be a success? Do you think that's what they've been lacking? PETA, DXE, Dr. Greger, all the multi-million-dollar vegan organizations, all the things they're doing. But whatever, we'll just stay with PETA because it's one example. But vegan activism, if you give them another 7 years and another $100 million, do you think then it'll be a success? Do you think that's all they've been waiting for? That's all that's been lacking? Gonna turn to the comment section briefly here. Yeah, Brendan Williams comments, one of the BLM leaders used millions to buy a house for herself and then stepped down. What a joke. Well, Brendan, one of the other questions is stepping down from what? So my first video ever about BLM, there is a playlist I can give you guys. Go to the playlist section of my channel and search for it. There is a playlist of all the videos I've done about Black Lives Matter. But one of the first videos was criticizing their constitution and talking about the importance of having a constitution, how to find it. Now, I'm just say honestly, my more recent videos about Black Lives Matter are better than my early videos. They are. I just say I've improved with time. I do think my current critique of BLM is more meaningful than the initial critique. But at that stage, there was at least one website with a constitution that defined the movement. And then they very quickly stepped back from that. They deleted that constitution. They never wrote another one. And who is in charge and who's leading them and what are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? You know? Yeah. So I just say, to say that she stepped down, when was she ever a leader? These were very self-seeking people who were selling T-shirts with their brand name. I've criticized that in general. There's all this money involved and all this branding involved and going around and giving interviews and promoting your book, book tours, whatever. The three women who were the founders. But when you say she stepped down, from my perspective, she stepped down long ago, back when they deleted that constitution. Because at least that stage, when they had a constitution, there was some notion that, okay, this is what the movement supports. This is what it doesn't. Like these tactics, not these ones. Their position on use of violence or nonviolence in protest. There was some definition, and when they gave that up, I feel like after that, it's really just been a joke. Okay, so someone in the audience, Kutlu. Sorry, I have a name that's hard to pronounce too. But anyway, Kutlu in the audience. He's saying, "You're right. Atheism must be a creative ideology, and we are losing." Do you preach to people about atheism like you do about veganism? What is your rhetorical approach on the topic of that? So great question. And I mean, I think the short answer is yes. But when you say preach, I talk to people one-on-one in a way which is meaningful for them. And yeah, I deal. So it's very bespoke. It's not that I have a generalized approach that's the same for everyone. But I'd also say I think atheism is another great comparison here. So sorry, I gave I used abortion and the anti-abortion movement, use these different parallels, but two more to throw in. Well, what about cigarette smoking? And what about atheism, right? Now, again, these may seem very different, but what I said at the beginning of that long rant, I was like, well, look, this ultimately comes down to a personal, it comes down to me, it comes down to you, it comes down to your commitment. I've got to do this for myself. Well, you got to quit smoking. So, do you think disruption is going to make people quit smoking? Like this, yeah.
People to stop smoking crack.
Great. Yeah, great example. So yeah, we have a huge number of drug addicts on the street here. We live in the Pacific Northwest. Do you think you could get out and protest on the streets the same way the vegans do, stereotypical vegans like Direct Action Network? That's great. How about you use anonymous for the voiceless as tactics? You have people standing wearing a mask silently, holding a video screen to protest against crack cocaine.
No,
you know.
Hand it out to every resident.
But like, do you think you can fight against opiate drug addiction or, stimulant drug addiction or methamphetamine addiction? Do you think you could get rid of drug addiction or cigarette smoking through disruption? My answer is no. But significantly, my answer is no, that won't work, not even if you have just as much support as the anti-abortion movement, which vegans will never have, right? And let's be honest, BLM will never have it either. Like BLM got a ton of support for a short time, but like long term, does BLM have the kind of constituency and money behind it that anti-abortion? I mean, this is the big leagues. This is in the millions and millions of dollars, both of these. But the ability to run ad campaigns and do high costs, things the way anti-abortion is. People are religiously committed to anti-abortion as a movement, but it fails. So no, disruption will not work, in ending cigarette smoking or ending cocaine addiction or ending fentanyl addiction. Fentanyl's the big opiate out here, but it's not gonna work. Now, sorry. So turning to your question, Kutlu, well, what about atheism? Is that the way to accomplish atheism, to create an atheist society? In my opinion, obviously not. Now, nobody does it. Nobody has the balls, right?
Disrupt church service on Sundays.
Disrupt Santa Claus, right? Are you going to show up at the shopping mall and disrupt Santa Claus and say, no, this is bad and evil and wrong? Stop teaching kids to believe in Santa Claus. Stop teaching kids to believe in Jesus. The biggest one, circumcision.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about circumcision, right? So guys, I'm happy. We have some more people in the audience. If you have a moment, hit the thumbs up button if you can, because it helps more people discover the video. It helps, during the live stream. So if you've forgotten to hit thumbs up, do so. If you change your mind later, you can hit thumbs down instead. You can actually undo a thumbs up. It's allowed, so you can change your mind later. But it is good to get more people in the audience and let people know the video. But yeah, so I could easily make a separate video or a whole series of separate videos about talking about atheism with people. But guys, I know. So on camera, I know I have a very passionate manner of speaking, unlike in real life. No, in real life, I'm very passionate too, but in a different way. And, when I've talked about atheism with people, face to face, when you're dealing with people, it is a much more caring and sotto voce communication. I remember there was a young woman, 24 maybe. Sorry, I say young woman, but how young do you mean? And I remember she had been totally raised in a Christian family and so on. And she had recently converted to a different, more fundamentalist Christian group that was based on just reading and just doing what was in the Bible. Now, a lot of people haven't read the Bible. I have. So I was able to, confront her with how absurd that is. And I was able to say things that really something. Oh, okay. You do animal sacrifice? No. That's in the Bible. Do you stone women? Do you engage in slavery and sex slavery? So do you let your husband? She wasn't married. I remember her kind of sort of having a crush on me, that girl. But maybe she was already married too. I forget. But that was the dynamic. It was a little bit flirty. My relation with that particular one. Okay. So what about circumcision? What about slavery? What about animal sacrifice? But even just dealing with animal sacrifice and to deal with that seriously and say, no, this is what the religion's about. No, you don't get to decide. You didn't write the Bible. Okay. Don't tell me you believe in literal adherence to the Bible and practicing every word, which is what she told me, that she'd converted from some more mainstream Christian group to this fundamentalist group, which is based on the Bible, And, another one of the things I talked to her about, so again, this is very bespoke. This is meaningful to the particular person. She had the delusion that Christianity is the oldest religion in the world, and it's not, and for someone like her, white person, born and raised in Canada, just to even get into talking about the history of the world, like, have you heard of China? Have you heard of India? Have you heard of Buddhism? Like, this could have a deeply subversive, motivating effect in these ways. And, sorry, this is just one anecdote about one conversation with people. So look, that's reaching out to somebody one-on-one and, taking these things seriously and showing that you care about them enough to offend them. I care about you enough to hurt your feelings. Really talk to you about what circumcision means. Even most people don't talk about it. It's, swept under the carpet or something. Let's really deal with this, man to man or man to woman or woman to woman or whatever it may be. Mian dui mian, we say in Chinese, face to face. Okay, but this brings us back to the topic of this video, right? Which is, but how then do you pursue real cultural change? How do you pursue real political change? How do you scale it up when we're no longer talking about, one-on-one interactions, right? Okay, so I'm now going to return to the question I got from Cranky Vegan in the first place, which included the question, or it concluded with a question. He said to me, I think in relatively powerful words, he said, well, and how do you in your own life, how do you pursue this or how do you live this? Great question. Fortunately, it takes more than an hour to answer it. And I said that to him at the time, like, well, do you want me to record a monologue just for you? Do you want me to write a book length answer to this question? But look, guys, so someone in the audience says that he was raised in a young earth creationist conservative Christian household. So that is the most crazy form of authentically American Christianity. I mean, whether or not it's as crazy as forms of Christianity you can find in Europe, but that is very, very distinctly American. So those are the people that are obsessed with proving that Darwin is a hoax. And they're obsessed with this kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, and he's moved on to philosophy after something, and Buddhism was helpful. So that is also significant. I agree. So Brendan, I agree. Like, even though, so I'm not a Buddhist and I don't preach Buddhism, I think it is very interesting how Buddhism can challenge the presuppositions of both Christians and Muslims in a way that's useful and creates a gap for them to then kind of think of themselves and question, and leads them to more atheist or more scientific or more human attitudes. Okay, guys, so look, I would describe my life in relation to vegan activism in 3 periods. And I'm going to start here with the period in the middle, okay? Because the period in the middle was when I pursued a career as a baker. So, how are you an activist? How do you pursue political, social, and cultural change? All right, and we're talking about me. We're not talking about the leader of the Haitian Revolution. We're not talking about what you would do in China in 1949 or something, right? We're just talking about me, all right? So I'm a middle-aged man. I have a daughter whom I never get to see in France, right? I have my own situation in terms of university education and career and the need to earn money and relative poverty and what have you. I've got different considerations, right? And this is the middle period. This isn't my first period. It wasn't my first idea for vegan activism to go out and work in a bakery. It's like, okay, I can take this on. I can enroll in classes. I can learn how to bake. Again, there's a lot of personal this. I can wake up every morning at 4 a.m. Baking is an early morning activity and walk in the cold. And I can bake this bread and make vegan croissants and make vegan birthday cakes. And I can do this. And this can be the cornerstone of my vegan activism, right? Okay, so if you guys don't know this already, was it $50,000 the tuition? It was something like that. Oh, really? Oh, wow, it shows how my memory works. Yeah, you're right. So I just asked Melissa, how much was the tuition? You know what? I was probably remembering both of our tuitions added together or something. Okay, so, and was that US dollars? Again, it doesn't matter really. But okay, anyway, so we paid $12,000 Canadian each to learn how to bake bread. learn how to be bakers in general. So that's $24,000. So it was a huge commitment. It was a huge decision. And I presumed it was going to change the rest of my life. Now, you can watch the YouTube videos we made about it. Long story short, it didn't work out. Why? Because everyone hates vegans. I mean, that's it. They're basically much more powerfully than you could say there was prejudice against you as a black person in this university in the year 2021. I'm aware just a few decades ago, there was really intense prejudice. You know, today there may be some mild racism and prejudice against you as a black person in the University of America. Totally get that. However, they will not just walk up to you and tell you we're kicking you out because you're black. Well, guess what? We got told we're being kicked out because we're vegan. Okay. This is in the 21st century, this was intense hatred and discomfort with the fact that we were vegan. And they promised us, we talked to them about it before. The guy in charge reassured us that it would be fine for us as vegans, and it turned out it wasn't fine. Okay, but look, this is just illustrating for those of you who don't know the background on that. You know, I had to come up with answers to the question of how am I going to be a vegan activist? How am I going to pursue political and social change? And that was what was possible for me. And it's humbling, humiliating work in a lot of ways. And I literally wept over it. I mean, I remember weeping, talking to Melissa, saying, I put so many years into studying Buddhist philosophy, learning the Pali language. And by the way, I didn't just learn Pali. I learned to read and write classical literary Sinhalese, classical literary Burmese, Thai, Laotian, Cambodian. Like there was so much language work, so much erudition. So I built myself up as a scholar of Buddhism for years. I did years working on Korean and Ojibwe as languages and political traditions. I did all this work on language and philosophy under so many headings, and I studied Chinese, I studied Japanese, like, okay, I've got all this depth of expertise. And I mean, at one point I had to try to justify becoming an intelligence officer in the military. I applied to do intelligence work for the military. And as humbling as that is, you're like, well, I would be taking my expertise about world politics, world history, and even some of these languages, and I'd be applying it. I'd be doing intelligence work for the Canadian government, for the Canadian military, and probably exactly my expertise with China, Cambodia, Thailand, my expertise with politics, it would be used to some extent. You got to talk yourself into it because it's also pretty horrible to join the army and do that kind of work. Anyway, joining the army also didn't work out. But my point is, it was heartbreaking to make the decision to say, okay, I'm going to take all this education and all this erudition. And by the way, also, like my past plans, I was planning to open a publishing house. Shout out to my ex-wife if she's watching this. But, back when I was married to my first wife, all the time we were talking about book publishing, and different plans and schemes just to get into publishing. And, I just say it was something. I wasn't just a writer. I was an editor. And, there were other ideas of my scholarly life that was to come and what my life was going to be like when I was 60 years old, right? That's still something when we talk about studying Chinese and how high a priority in my life learning Chinese should be. One of the things is, well, what is my life going to be like when I'm in my 60s? How am I going to be living with this scholarship? Okay. So it's not a minor lifestyle choice. Okay. I'm going to put all of that aside and I'm going to commit to waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and mixing dough in a dough mixer, doing what's really essentially factory labor. Most of the work, there is some creativity involved when you design the product. There is, but day in and day out, it is cleaning the machines. Most of your work is cleaning the machines afterwards, combining the ingredients, pulling the crank on the machine. I mean, it is factory labor plus a lot of cleaning because it's a factory that has to be at food grade levels of cleanliness and safety, right? And that's what you're committing to do for the rest of your life. Why? For veganism. It's not for money, right? It was for vegan activism to be part of our lives, right? And it didn't work out. So I would say there were 3 periods for me in how I answer this question for how I'm going to pursue political social. And there was a period before that, which is maybe the more entertaining period on the channel, where I was really reaching out to anyone and everyone positively. Now, in political terms, you could say I was trying to lead a mass movement, but it was a very tiny mass movement. And why do I say mass movement when you're talking about a small number of people? Because, pardon me, in England, they use the term a big tent movement. They actually also use the term big tent church. Anyway, the point is, when you talk about a mass movement or a big tent movement, the point is anyone can join. Anyone can sign up. And I'm reaching out to people all the time and talking to them over Skype, I never owned a telephone in those years. It was always Skype. But, having voice calls and having emails and talking to people and saying, I want you, I'm recruiting. I want you to join. I want to do this. What can we do together? And all of those conversations always ended with me asking them, where do you want to be 5 years from now? What do you want to have accomplished? And what do you want to have organized? I don't think a single person had an answer to that question. So it was hundreds of people, right? And of course, indirectly, like through medium, like through this kind of media, like, YouTube videos, it was millions of people, right? But in terms of direct face-to-face conversations, like directly talking to people, email and Skype, it's hundreds of people, right? And I'm saying, yes, let's get organized. Yes, let's do a conference. Yes, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's incorporate a new party. Let's incorporate a new lobby. Let's make something up. I'm getting out there with these creative ideas and I'm saying, who's with me, right? 5 years went by and none of those people had accomplished anything. None of them, right? Most of them went back to eating meat. They stopped being vegan, right? Shout out to Jason Pizzino. Holy shit. Shout out to Bonnie Rebecca. Shout out to everyone else, right? I mean, what I found was, okay, two things. Some people, if you're new here, some people might say, well, your mistake was you were reaching out to social media influencers, like people who have YouTube channels or this kind of thing. And that I wasn't reaching out to the respectable academic people with PhDs or the kind of respectable career activists, okay? And you're wrong. I reached out to everyone during those years. And let me tell you something, the so-called respectable people, they were the worst. They are the worst people in the movement. The people on social media are the best. I mean that 100% sincerely, 100%. Just, the sincerity and presence of mind and commitment and the risk of your own face and identity that's involved in coming here on camera and saying, this is why I'm a vegan, this is what I care about, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. That litmus test, you might think that's a really low barrier to entry to jump, but it's not. And the people with PhDs would never get over that. They're the worst people in this game. They are the worst people in the vegan activist game. And I did reach out to all those people, and I talked to those people as much as I could, and most of them were afraid to talk to me. So shout out to Casey Taft. I mean, if you want to see something hilarious, you can search this YouTube channel for my critique of the book of Casey Taft. And then there is a video, I think it's not quite as easy to find, which is me responding to Casey Taft sending me hate mail. So this is a guy with a PhD and a publishing house, by the way, who's published books and has published supposedly respectable, erudite academic books that are complete horseshit on how vegan activism is supposed to work. And I gave I read the book and I gave a critique and analysis of what's wrong with this book. And this guy sent me the most teenaged hate mail imaginable. I can't believe you would put down my book. So those people were really too. Okay, so yeah, there was an earlier period of time. And I know it was more entertaining for the audience, right? Because I would come on with this energy. And even if I was angry, it was uplifting, angry energy. Because I was saying to people, hey, we can do better than this. We can do better than Freely. We can do better than Durian Rider. We can do better than PETA, people for the ethical treatment of animals. We can do better than Direct Action Everywhere. They're idiots, but we're not idiots. We don't have to be idiots. We don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. We're in this together. Let's do it. There was that energy. So the manifesto from that period of time was my video on community. So I think there's even a playlist for that. But if you don't know that video, that period of this more positive mass movement energy on my channel, where that was what I was trying to do, is so on community, and that video inspired people to translate it into many, many languages. So here, this is Slovenian. Wow, man, there you go. So they're one of the least watched versions. So there's the Slovenian translation. I speak in English, but there's subtitles in Slovenian. Here we have the Greek translation. We got a whole sequence here. That's it. They'll have pretty decent numbers of views too. Just saying. Well, I'm getting all the obscure languages here. Danish translation. Okay. So just say, regardless of what. So it's titled something like On Community, a Manifesto, and, that was the manifesto for that period of my YouTube channel. And again, it had a lot of positive energy because it was recruiting anyone and everyone. Speaking of which, guys, sorry, we have more people in the audience. This is how it happens when people do thumbs up. If you have a second, hit the thumbs up button because it helps more people discover the video. It makes the video visible rather than invisible. Has a positive effect. I'm not just for the channel, really has positive effect for this video right now. It means YouTube will notify more people that I'm live streaming. And admittedly, this is a completely spontaneous live stream. Nobody got advance warning. So I'm happy. If you happen to be washing dishes, you happen to be at home at the time of live streaming. It's wonderful to have an audience this large when you do something with absolutely no preparation for it. Okay. So I just say there was this earlier period of optimism and of approaching this as a mass movement. And what that proved to me again and again and again, is that talent is scarce. And guys, not everyone's an idiot. Not everyone's a bad person. I did get a lot of flattering email in that time. And I remember people writing to me. I remember this phrasing coming up again. He said, I remember people writing to me and saying, why won't you realize that the type of vegan leader you are describing is you and it's only you? Like there's nobody else to look to for leadership. Like, why don't you stop criticizing other leaders of the vegan movement? And why don't you take on this role? Because you're the only one who can do it. So no, it wasn't 100 people who said that to me. Maybe it was 10 people or 12 people, you know what I mean? But it was memorable to me that the same kind of phrasing came up repeatedly because they were responding to the fact that I had this positive, uplifting thing of saying, look, let's make something happen, guys. And I was trying to make it happen democratically. I wasn't trying to do it all my way. Like I was talking to them saying, okay, guys, let's have a conference. Well, here's my idea for a conference. What do you guys? I was trying to get people to collaborate and work together. And no, to say that talent is scarce is an understatement. And one of my videos, and really the title just says it all, was that I do not want to be a one-man movement. So this is part of the breaking point. Oh yeah, so this is really one of the crucial videos to see, and it's only 11 minutes long, so that is short. That is a concise summation of the change. I mean, I don't think it tells the whole story. It's concise but incomplete, probably. But in 11 minutes, it talks about the end of that period of optimism in retrospect, right? And I have made videos talking about this. So this, guys, I know most of you were not here at the beginning of this video, but I began by talking about elitism, kind of elitism versus populism, the idea of a mass movement as opposed to a self-consciously elitist movement. And I switched to having a view of the world where I said, look, we have to acknowledge the scarcity of talent first and foremost, the scarcity of positively motivated and capable people as the primary problem, first and foremost. And we have to deal with that first. So like even the recruiting is misguided, right? And you can tell even this video, I'm not trying to recruit any of you people. I'm not, it's like, guess what? Whether I like it or not, I am one of incredibly few people who can do anything with or for the movement. And I don't even know one other. I don't have a group of 5. I don't have a group of 10. I don't have a group of 20. So you did this recruitment phase for like 5 years, right? And I reached millions of viewers. I'm just saying, I reached a huge number of viewers. It was very successful, just considered as a social media phenomenon, right? And a lot of people were deeply influenced by and moved by videos that talked about, I have talked about every aspect and every facet of the vegan movement and vegan politics, vegan philosophy, and all kinds of really, really specific issues about dog ownership and having carnivore pets, and I mean all kinds, and palm oil and deforestation and recycling and climate change. A million issues from a million different angles have been talked about. And guess what? At the end of that process, I'm all alone and I don't want to be a one-man movement. And there's no way for me to move forward, by running a bakery, by baking bread. So guess what? I have no choice. I've got to be Voltaire. The only way for me to make a difference is as a completely isolated, creative individual, which is what I am. I can be a filmmaker. I can be a stand-up comedian. I can be a novelist. I can write books, right? That is the only power I've got. That is the only choice left open to me. Okay. Voltaire. These really are the weapons of the weak. And yet Voltaire profoundly changed the world in the way that protesters carrying placards never would, never could, never will. Right. And now I've said recently in other videos, in very different contexts, okay, my failure is better than your success, right? So I don't mean you in the audience, right? But this kind of contrast. I think it is worthwhile to point out that like the failure of this YouTube channel is more meaningful, is more important than the success of ProVeg International, multi-million-dollar budget, right? I mean that seriously. I think the failure of this channel is more important than many multi-million-dollar success stories in veganism. And I think it really has profoundly touched and profoundly influenced people's lives, including people who hate my guts. Guess what, guys? Erin Janis was profoundly influenced by this channel. Erin Janis is more famous than me. She's more successful than me. Guess what? My failure matters more than her success across the board, right? Including Durian Rider, including Joey Carbstrong, including all kinds of, frankly, shit for brains people. They ain't got no brains. Well, I got enough brains to share. There's a role for being a creative intellectual in this movement. And it's not my first choice. And it's not my second choice, but I have to look at the road ahead in terms of being a creative artist, a creative author, period, because that's the only option I've got left. Okay, I'm tempted to hit the stop button and call it a wrap. By the way, thanks very much, guys, for the thumbs up. That's a wonderful thumbs up count. You've given me. But I only answered part of the original question. So, maybe there is a more theoretical thing. If you guys have any questions, I'm pausing. I'm going to drink some water. If you want to ask a question, now's the time to ask. It's your last chance for this live stream. It's something you particularly want to cover. Theory of change. Talked a lot about the practice of change. So let's talk about the theory of change. And we've talked a lot about narrowing down this very broad and nebulous sphere of change to the personal in particular of what change can I make in my circumstances, culturally, politically, etc. Ultimately, the change we're talking about is legal, period. Right? Ultimately, there's going to be a law or there's going to be a rewriting of the Constitution, period. That's the change we want. Now, I'm saying this about veganism. I would say the exact same thing about police brutality, about reforming the justice system, because it's not just the police, the courts, the prisons. Okay, that reform must be legal. Okay, what happened when a group of bored housewives led a grassroots democratic movement to change the American Constitution to make alcohol illegal? Did it work? Okay. The problem is they accomplished the legal change first, and the cultural change was left to lag behind. The cultural change hasn't happened yet, right? Now, let me ask you another question. This is maybe more challenging. Okay, for the gay rights movement, what if gay marriage, gay rights, gay equality in the workplace, what if that had been accomplished legally in 1948? When America was intensely culturally homophobic, right? But you just say, well, World War II was over. Like, people could have just learned the lesson from looking at the Nazis, right? Like, well, the Nazis persecuted and punished people for being homosexual. We don't want to be like the Nazis. Like, really, it doesn't take a genius to look at what just happened in World War II with the Nazis and say, okay, let's do the opposite. Let's actually give gay people civil rights, right to get married, like, a law that makes it illegal to fire someone just because they're gay and this kind of thing. People have the right to be openly gay. You could also, by the way, be pro-gay just because you've read a lot of stuff from ancient Greece and Rome. I just mentioned our classical literature is very pro-gay, gets forgotten about to a fault, I might say. Even Aristotle was kind of freaked out by that. Aristotle dealing with the level of homosexuality in Athens as opposed to his hometown where I grew up in the north of Greece. It's like, well, this gay thing is really fashionable in Athens. So look, there are different routes. It was possible. You could have had, legislation to make homosexuality legal and normal then. Now, obviously, there's a sense in which we'd say it is good. I think most people in this audience would say that prohibition is good, like in principle. Oh, gee, making alcohol illegal. Okay, so William McGeegan says simply, prohibition happened. Okay, prohibition happened, but it failed, right? If you want to create a culture of sobriety, if you want to create a culture that values doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and that sees this as the right thing to do, right? That's a huge cultural challenge. You have to pursue cultural change and social change. And the question is, when does the legal change come in, right? Do you want to have the legal change first and then wait for society to catch up with it? Or do you want to have the cultural change first? And then for you as a relatively powerless individual, even if you're a multimillionaire, I mean, some of my fans are wealthy people, and they mentioned, so I have fans who write to me and say, hey, look, if you need me to donate for a project, let me know, because they write in saying they're wealthy and they'll support something if I want to do it. Even if you are a wealthy person, you are powerless when standing up against the culture of homophobia. Like, what can you do? Even if you have millions of dollars, what can I do to change the world when the whole institution, everything in society is homophobic, when everything in society is racist? And again, if we're talking about 1948, everything in society is homophobic, everything in society is racist. What do? You are powerless standing up against a society where everyone drinks alcohol, and everyone regards alcohol not just as fun and entertaining, they even regarded it as healthy. I mean, they really didn't regard this as a health problem in the way that we do today. So you can't make alcohol illegal at that stage, right? Now, gay rights went through many phases, and it is an imposition. It was hard for people to cope with. It's not easy. It wasn't easy for the Catholic school board to have to employ openly gay people as equals. I'm not saying it's easy. And I've mentioned this example before, but I do think it is a real turning point. There was a comedy on American television called Soap. That's the title, SOAP, Soap. There was a comedy on American television that was the first TV show to have an openly gay character, an openly gay protagonist. And they made a lot of jokes about it. I mean, he was the butt of jokes. I mean, sometimes he won and sometimes he lost in jokes. The point was not to ridicule or vilify homosexuals. But at that time, just having a gay character in a comedy on television making jokes about being gay, and he's not in the closet or something. He's not just an effeminate character or something, and talking about homosexuality. So it's this big turning point for the culture, right? But of course, there are differences, right? Everybody knows somebody who died in a drunk driving accident. Everybody knows somebody who's an alcoholic. Everybody knows somebody who's gay, even if they're not aware that they know somebody who's gay. You might be kidding yourself about one of your coworkers or one of your professors or one of your uncles or your best friend even, okay? Homosexuality, there are enough people around who are gay to bring this effort forward. Depending on where you live, everybody knows somebody who is black, if we're going to talk about the progress of the civil rights movement. It is just not the case that everybody knows somebody who is vegan, right? It is not the case that people can perceive the harm done, by eating meat, or they can perceive the benefit to all society presented and offered by veganism. They can't see the ecological argument. They can't see the ethical argument, right? I mean, again, so if you're talking about civil rights for black people, it's very obvious. You say, hey, look, this whole society is going to be transformed radically as soon as we give equal rights to black people. Hey, this whole society is going to be transformed radically when we give equal rights to homosexual people. That's obvious. That's impossible to ignore. Veganism is very easy to ignore. So, that is the ultimate conclusion here, is that we are at a stage where veganism is an invisible cause, it is a despised cause, and talent is incredibly scarce. And the way forward, as I described at the start of this video, ultimately is going to be and has to be elitism. So one of the turning points, I went to a conference for vegans in Toronto. Don't worry, I have only a few more minutes to say. We're just wrapping up the video, guys. I'm seeing your comments come in. Yes, so somebody in the United says that he's 18. He or she is 18 and is seen as a nutcase for not drinking alcohol. Yeah, I know that. So when I stopped drinking, when I completely stopped drinking and doing drugs of any kind, I lost my entire friend group. I mean, the entire network of people I'd known. I was cut off from everything in Canada. Melissa is nodding her head and saying she had a similar experience. Yeah. So compulsory drinking Oh yeah, and family. Well, sure.
I'm
Yeah.
seen as a freak.
So Melissa is just saying that she's seen as a freak at family events, the level of ostracism for supporting sobriety. So I'm just mentioning, I'm just being blunt here in case it wasn't clear before. I would support making alcohol illegal in theory, right? But the question is, if you make alcohol illegal in 2021, right, it could be much more of a failure than it was the last time you made alcohol illegal, right? Now, again, I'm not in a position to say morally, oh, well, it sure is a good thing we delayed gay rights until people accepted it. No, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. It would be, in theory, it would be wonderful to make veganism legally mandatory in 2021. But obviously, that would result in a kind of level of subversion of the law, a kind of, deinstitutionalization of a huge part of the economy. The black market would become larger than the legal market. That would fail to an unbelievable extent. So, I mean, I just say we're still, whatever, we're not yet in the 100th anniversary of Prohibition. But I will say this, I will foretell the future. When we come to the 100th anniversary of Prohibition, we will be no closer to having an alcohol-free society than we were before. When we come to the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Vegan Society, we'll be no closer. And that is in part because of the things I've just talked about for more than an hour, that we're using the wrong tactics, so on and so forth. Yeah. Anyway, we have lots of people talking about how memorable the TV show Soap was. I'm sure you can see it for free on YouTube now. I don't know, on YouTube, on Netflix, somewhere. I don't know if you want to look up that show. Billy Crystal played the gay character. So an actor who went on to be tremendously famous, and not gay. He's heterosexual, but he was playing the gay role. Yeah. Okay, so this is the puzzle we're looking at, and it has only 3 pieces, right? So we're talking about legal change, cultural change, and political change, right? And the question is now, how do you get there? Now, I want to say, if you have 20 people who can work together, 20 people who have good intentions, like they're not just doing this because they want to get famous on Instagram or YouTube or something. If you have 20 people, you are in the most privileged category of vegans in the world, right? Like, just to have 20 people organized and well-intentioned, that's amazing. I don't know anyone who's got 20 people, right? Talent is scarce, and for each of those people, when you're talking about talented, hardworking people, they're already busy. They've already got jobs, they've got careers, they've got things to do. They've got better things to do than contribute their time to your vegan movement, right? So then we get into a very different sort of question. Given the scarcity, given the hopelessness at this point of any kind of political change, any kind of legal change, right? That leaves cultural change, right? So we get a good question here. Someone writes in, Constantia writes in, so should we focus on trying to make change through the law, organizing politically, etc.? So the problem with your question, Constantia, is that you assume there are people to organize. What do you mean we should get organized? What we? I've been doing this for 7 years, 8 years now. There is no we. None. I don't know one vegan in the city of Victoria I can meet for lunch, I can organize anything with. All right, not one. And this is the capital city of this province. When I went to Taiwan, I tried through every method, not just social media, not just Facebook. I did everything I could to meet up and collaborate with vegan activists in Taiwan. And I spoke Chinese. I could speak, read, and write Chinese. So I could write to these vegan groups in Chinese on Facebook saying, hey, I'm a vegan activist. This is my YouTube channel. I'm now living in Taiwan. I want to meet with vegan activist groups. I want to know what you guys are doing. Like, I'd love to interview you for the channel. I want to get involved. I never met one vegan activist the whole time I was in Taiwan. And I didn't just do it through Facebook. For example, I went to restaurants. with a friend of mine who speaks Chinese as a first language. So, I could speak Chinese, but obviously not completely fluently. I'm very far from completely fluent. But he was speaking Chinese perfectly to them and explaining, this guy's a vegan activist and he has a YouTube channel. He's trying to meet these kind of people. Never met one. We went to Athens, Greece. What, did we meet one vegan activist, one vegan person in Athens, Greece? Not one. We've traveled Paris. Randomly on the street, we met one vegan activist in Paris. There was one vegan. Remember her? Chinese or Vietnamese woman. I forget which. Yeah. There was one person who was like, "Oh wow, you're famous. I know you." There's one person who like recognized me on the street, and she basically never talked to us again, which is okay. But like no, and that was back in my recruitment phase. That was I was saying, "Oh great, let's make something happen. Then let's do something. Let's really do something positive." Everywhere I've gone, and guys, I gave advanced warning before we went to these places on YouTube. I remember making videos saying, "Hey guys, we're going to be in Paris. We're going to be in this city. We're going to be in this city. If there's anyone if there's anyone doing anything." So I've been reaching out for years. Okay. Sorry, not 4 years, 4 years, 7 years, 8 years, whatever it's been now. We're going to be coming. Okay. There is no other talent. I am alone, as I said in the title of that video, why I quit veganism, I don't want to be a one-man movement. Okay. And I am. It's just me, all right? I have no colleagues. I have no contemporaries. There is nobody I can invite to a conference. There's nobody I can even do a Skype call with, okay? And if you argue back, what about Joey Carbstrong? I've spoken to Joey Carbstrong. I know all these people. To say I'm 6 degrees of separation as it grows, I'm like 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation. I've talked to or communicated with, directly or indirectly, all the leaders and everything going on in the vegan movement, including Phoebe Frampton in fucking England and shit, like including more obscure leaders in the vegan movement. All right. They know me. Okay. Gary Francione knows me and knows my work. I would be amazed if Gary Yourofsky doesn't. Shout out to Detroit. Melissa's from Detroit, right? Who's that doctor in Detroit? Joel Kahn. Yeah. Melissa met him face-to-face. I've talked to him by email. Okay. What do you mean, should we get organized for legal change? Do you think we have the numbers that Mothers Against Drunk Driving have? We don't. It's taking it all the way back to my original video, right? Do you think we have the numbers? Do you think we have the support morally, financially, in terms of, no. And again, everybody knows someone who's died in a car accident. Everyone knows a tragedy connected to drunk driving. That's the fundamental impetus behind Mothers Against Drunk Driving. People, you reach out and you harness that discontent, you harness that dissent and say, look, let's get organized. Let's lobby government to have stricter laws against drunk driving. And they did, and they won, and they changed the world. Mothers Against Drunk Driving changed every day. When I took the bus to school, there were posters up from Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Campaigns against drunk driving completely surrounded me growing up. It was a huge movement for my generation. Yeah.
It's even more surreal given that how many people know somebody who is affected by the diseases?
Oh, of course. Of course.
When you talk about heart disease, diabetes, obesity,
yes,
these ills that come from eating meat and drinking dairy, eating dairy products.
Right. So sorry, just in case you guys can hear, Melissa was just saying that in the same sense that everyone knows somebody who died in a car accident, you can also make an argument that everybody knows somebody who died of an illness caused by eating meat, eating dairy, eating eggs, which is true, but they don't see it that way, so it's invisible. Ultimately, it's irrelevant to the ethical argument because either you're motivated to do the right thing because they do, or you're not. You just have a low cholesterol, non-vegan diet or whatever, and people do their own thing. But look, but no, I mean that's. Look, everyone has seen an animal slaughtered. You can put it that way too, but they don't care. They don't feel responsible. So anyway, there are some questions suggesting particular people because I've alluded to a bunch of people like Gary Yourofsky, Gary Francione. I've named some people, Joey Carbstrong. Now, look, guys, turn it around. How do you think Joey Carbstrong feels about me? Because I've talked to him enough. I think Joey Carbstrong is afraid of me. I think Joey Carbstrong feels that I'm smarter than him. He asked me for help on a couple issues, where he said, look, he wrote in the guy, I'm sorry, if you've ever communicated with him, his style of writing is very simplistic, but he pretty much wrote to me saying, hey, you're smart, you know about these things. Can you tell me what should I say about this issue? That was pretty much what he wrote to me. I think people like Joey Carbstrong, and we've spoken to Aaron Janis. I'm saying we because Melissa was there. I know Aaron Janis pretty well at this point. People like Joey Carbstrong, people like Aaron Janis, they are aware that I know what I'm talking about in a way that nobody else in the movement does. All right. They're aware that I bring something to this in terms of expertise and acumen and perspective that's really valuable and really rare, and they don't have it and they fear it. Right. You know, and I think fear is the right word. I don't think they hate me. So we talked to Aaron a couple months ago. I don't think Aaron Janice hates me. I don't think Joey Carbstrong hates me. I don't think, really, I don't think Paul Bashir hates me, to give another example. He's a pretty awful guy, but I don't know, maybe he doesn't hate me more than he hates other people or something. No, but there is fear. And I just want to say this, guys. Back when I had the conflict with Durian Runner, you will notice, or you may have noticed, that non-vegans were much more appreciative and positive towards me than vegans. Like, there were all these kind of normal people because of the size of that controversy. It was covered in some mainstream newspapers and shit. There was this legal conflict, and Freely's career had suddenly imploded. He was Freely. There was some kind of mainstream recognition of this weird thing that happened in Thailand. So, for a brief second, it was hundreds of thousands of people rather than tens of thousands who were interested in what I was doing and saying. Like, normal people who had nothing to do with veganism looked at this situation, understood immediately. But you talk about the vegans, vegan insiders, vegans like Joe Best, vegans like Vegan Foot Soldier. These are the names of YouTube channels you don't know. Vegans like Joe Vegan. People who were close to, people who had direct email correspondence with me, people who spoke to me on Skype and shit, like people who directly communicate with me, and they could verify all the facts. Like, if they wanted to see receipts, if they wanted to see proof of things illegal, those people all immediately got committed to vilifying me, trying to ostracize me, because they were afraid of me, because I was the only guy in the movement who knew what he was talking about. And I was the only guy in the movement asking a question so simple and so fundamental as, what are you doing 5 years from now? Okay. So let's talk about the future of the vegan movement. Let's talk about me and you, and let's talk about the next 5 years, and let's come up with a plan. And again, for this huge phase in this channel, I brought in all that positive energy. And when it was clear that that was going to come to nothing, that I was totally alone, phase 2, plan B was, okay, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get a degree from college, a baking college. I'm going to learn how to bake bread, and I'm going to open my own bakery, because that's something I can do alone. So that doesn't rely on anyone but me, which would have been a horrible life for me in a lot of ways, by the way, right? And now phase 3 is, okay, that failed. That proved to be impossible. And now I've really got to shift. It has been a shift. And Melissa, I don't know if you pick up on it. So let me just say this. Now I've shifted. Phase 3 is shifting to thinking of myself as a creative artist, thinking of myself as a creative writer like Voltaire, and also like a stand-up comedian, however much I have a little comedy. But I mean, Voltaire also was partly a comedian, just mentioned. But thinking, okay, that's what I have to do, whether it's as a filmmaker or as a YouTuber, whatever I do with it. Before I got with Melissa, I thought of myself as a researcher. I thought of myself as someone who's committed to nonfiction, and like this YouTube thing was this sideshow. But what I did was research. One of the essays Melissa read when she was falling in love with me was this hard-hitting research piece about a war that took place in 1920 involving China and Japan and Russia, and the Russian communists massacre everybody. It's this very dramatic chapter of the world's history. That was the kind of work I was doing. It's like, oh, I'm a researcher. And I just also am kind of, getting involved in vegan activism. And I saw myself as someone who had this, at that time, Direct Action Everywhere was declaring the importance of social science research. Oh, well, I actually am a social science researcher. I'm a researcher, comes out of the social sciences. I thought of myself as someone who did research. All right. But you have to do research with people. You have to do research about people. You have to do research for people. And also, research normally does depend on an institutional contact, institutional support. And it became very clear as the years went by that I would have absolutely none of that. So I've had to make a very difficult transition from thinking of myself as a researcher to thinking of myself as a creative artist. And however much or however little I'm going to accomplish now as a creative artist, it is very clear in terms of my theory of change, in terms of the forces that force me now to pursue cultural change. I am going to make that difference working alone. How can we have a culture of sobriety? How can we have a culture in which people are positively motivated to refuse cocaine, to refuse fentanyl, to refuse marijuana, to refuse alcohol, right? To refuse antidepressants. I mean, it's so great that the antidepressants don't work. But what happens if one day they invent an antidepressant that does work? That's going to be even more of an epidemic. You know what I mean? How can you create a culture that really is motivated to be sober, that really positively values sobriety, right? The easy answer everyone reaches for is the legal answer, is legislation, right? What's last they put for, make it illegal, right? The real question, the real challenge, the real struggle is cultural there, right? And once you achieve that cultural change, the same way we first achieved a cultural change in how we view gay people, right? The attitudes towards homosexuality, the homophobia had to change culturally. And then you have a change legally that cements it, that makes it obligatory. Like, oh yeah, it's not just that homophobia is bad, it's also illegal. Okay. So, that's the way that change happened. You need to look at, in an artistic and creative way, bringing about this kind of social change in our attitudes towards drugs, our attitudes towards sobriety, our attitudes towards the meaning of life, our attitudes towards what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, and how to choose the person you're gonna marry. You know what I mean? And I think if you are all alone, if you don't have a multi-million-dollar per year budget, if you're not leading an army, you have to look at doing that with the same utensils used all those centuries ago by a figure like Voltaire.